Hi, my name is Tyler Mowry, and this is the Writer's Mind Podcast, Episode 2. Okay, so here we are. Inside the Patreon. Welcome to the first episode inside of the Patreon. I'm glad you're here. We're gonna have a lot of fun. If you haven't joined the Discord yet, please join the Discord. There you're going to be able to submit questions and topics for the podcast, as well as talk with other people that are inside the Patreon and talk with other writers and, just kind of have that community, especially have that community that is behind a paywall, because the reality is you are going to find more serious people if they are willing to put a few bucks a month behind their passion and to be involved with this. So absolutely check out the Discord and find those people. And today what I want to talk about is something I've actually been thinking a lot about recently. So what I want to talk about today is the malleability of personality. So what I mean by this is, can we actually change as people, and can our baseline personalities actually change that much? So when, as you live your life, right, there's different experiences that happen to you, and you grow as a person and you realize things. But what's interesting is, does the experiences that you go through actually change you as a person, or does it only build upon what is naturally there as who you are, and you can't get out of that natural position, if that makes sense? So let me give you an example. For myself, one of the things that I've had to get better at and grow in is my ability to speak confidently and trust myself to speak confidently. So doing this podcast or making YouTube videos, or even trying to write and taking the initiative to be serious about writing, it's all part of this idea of being confident, thinking confidently, writing confidently, being aware that what you say matters, that whole idea, right? So my question is, because I had to build into that, is that actually an element of who I am? Or is this something that I've built that's like this extension of who I really am as a person, and who I really am as a person is a different thing entirely? So I think you can also relate this a lot to charisma. And there's this kind of interesting world that you enter into with, I'm sure you've seen YouTube channels or seen books about guys being pickup artists and, trying to, seduce women and these sorts of things. And the question there is that really who they are if it's not natural to them? If charisma is not a natural element to who they are, is that actually part of who they are? Or is it this extra element they've built upon who they are to do something in the world, speak to women or make a podcast, whatever? So, and then I think off of that, then there's a deeper question there, which is, people that we look to as naturally good at a certain thing, are they actually naturally good at that certain thing, or did they have time to learn that thing at an earlier stage in life, right? So let's say certain kids were learning how to be charismatic and confident at 7 years old versus somebody else who is not charismatic and confident and is 27 and is trying to learn how to be charismatic and confident when they're 27, right? And then the 27-year-old, could potentially be in a position where he's like, oh, well, this doesn't ever feel like a part of me because it's something I had to learn. So does that make sense? Where I think we have this, because my position on this is I think your personality is truly malleable. I think with enough effort and focus and growth, you can legitimately change who you are, in the sense that if there's something you don't like about yourself, if there's something you want to grow into, if you want to be a more charismatic person, or if you want to be a more peaceful person, or if you want to be a more disciplined person, I believe this is something that you can actually grow into. And I think that what happens is, my opinion is that I think that a lot of people start their growth in different areas earlier or later, and then they believe that certain things come natural to some people and certain things don't come natural to others. Now, I do believe there is a certain level of of natural talent that exists, and you are naturally good at certain things and you're not naturally good at other things. But just because you're not naturally good at other things doesn't mean that you can't learn those personality elements and actually integrate them into who you are. And so when I am talking about this, the reason I think this is important is I think this is important for who you are as a thinker and eventually as a writer as well, where the question is, are you able to change elements of yourself? And are you able to think? And are you able to, change your thought patterns in a way that actually makes you a stronger thinker and eventually a stronger writer because of that? I think for me, I sometimes get into this space where I don't believe myself. And what I mean by that is, like, I've made a lot of progress in multiple areas of my life. I have been very intentional in some of the different ways that I've grown as a person, and I'm sure that you have too. But sometimes I get into this space where I don't believe myself. I don't believe that I am this person that I'm trying to be. And I don't believe that I am that person that I'm trying to be because I had to go through a learning period to get to where I am and to go to where I'm going. And so I think that it causes this kind of level of self-doubt, right? You have this awareness of, oh, I used to be this. So because I used to be this, I am not this now. And I think that hopefully this is making sense to you. This is something that I've been thinking about recently. But I think this is an important thing because I think, one, I think, yes, you can change. And two, I think it's important to understand how you are viewing yourself and how you're viewing your thought patterns. Because I think there's a lot of people who have never really done any serious thinking who want to be writers. And that's fine. That's, but they need to then move into a space where they are now thinking about thinking and thinking about their thought patterns and why they believe certain things and how they operate in a certain way, both on like a worldview level and also in a personality level and an experiential level. And so, actually, this is kind of an interesting way to think about it. I think that when you're learning a language, right, you're learning your first language. You're learning that language so young that it really kind of just feels like a natural element of who you are, right? Like, you think about your first language, mine being English. I don't think of myself as someone who doesn't actually know English because I had to learn it, right? Like, in my mind, I've always known English. English is an integral part of who I am as a person because it's something that I learned so young, and it is my main method of communication to other people and in my own brain. And so when you're trying to learn a second language, I think you can also go through the same stage where you're like, oh, I don't really know this because I don't have the same I don't have the same situation where with my first language I just learned it immediately when I was a child, and it came naturally to me, and English is a natural language to me, but this new language can't be that because I have to learn it as an adult. I think things that we have to learn as adults, we attribute to not being us, and things we learned as children, we attribute to being who we are, if that makes sense. But that's not the case. We just learn certain things as children and we learn certain things later as adults, right? Just because you are not great at sports when you're 14, and is that high school age? I don't remember. Is that middle school? Or is it whatever? You're 14 or you're 15 and you're not great at sports in school. That doesn't mean that you can't learn to be good at sports. It just means that you weren't playing basketball when you were 9 and you don't have this just sort of innate few years of learned experience that somebody else may have because they just happened to be playing a sport before you were. And so I think that a lot of people, so what I mean by that, like the question with this, and you can look at this back in regards to storytelling, because it's like, you can look at people in the world today and their view on whether or not their personality or who they want to be, whether or not that's malleable, it actually ends up changing what they do and how they act and how they perceive the world, right? So this becomes a philosophical belief that people hold. So let me explain. Like, let's look at like the incel movement. If you've heard of this, essentially it's the idea is it's a group of mainly men who are involuntarily celibate. People do not want to sleep with them. Women do not want to sleep with them. And many of them believe that they have been simply dealt a bad hand, right? That, personality wise or looks wise or whatever, they are not naturally good with women, and they can never be. And it is their lot in life to be bad at this. And many of these people look at people who are, or they perceive to be naturally good with women and naturally charismatic and naturally good with relationships. And they say, these people did not have to work to learn how to do this. They weren't reading books about social dynamics. They weren't studying how to, approach a girl. They weren't, overly worried about their own insecurities or whatever. And so they get this viewpoint that there is this natural element to personality, and once you have your personality, it is unchanging. But this is something that I don't believe this at all, and I think that it's very much like a defeatist mentality where you believe that who you are is who you are, period, and there's no changing that. And that is a philosophical belief, right? That is a worldview. That your world is what it is, and there's nothing to change that. And I think that they look at, let's say, go back to like the high school sports kind of thing, where these kind of people, like an incel, like let's say a young 17, 18-year-old incel who would identify as part of this group, looks at like the captain of the football team and who is charismatic and confident and great with women and great with relationships. And they say, see, this person is doing this naturally. They don't have to learn. They just do the right thing. And that's something that I can never learn. And I'm just cut off from that element of personal growth or personality, excuse me. And I would say that I think they're wrong. I think that what is probably happening in this situation is we are seeing this captain of the football team stereotype as a person who was like around more social circles earlier in life and had to navigate social dynamics earlier than another kid might had to have. And there's a lot of factors that play into that. Maybe they were just in a more social situation. Maybe there is an element of that they are more naturally inclined to being more social, but that doesn't mean that somebody else who isn't as naturally inclined to being social can't learn that skill. And also, you potentially, maybe they were this captain of the football team. He was more attractive earlier in life. Therefore, he was in more situations learning about how to be within a social dynamic. And the this other person, this incel type of person, didn't have to do that and wasn't in that situation. And so did not have to spend the time to develop that skill or without having to think about it. I think we definitely just like learning your first language, you're not thinking about learning your first language. You're just learning it. But the languages that you learn after that, as you try to learn a language when you're older, when you're an adult, you are being intentional about learning that. It doesn't mean that you can't learn it. It just means that you're out of the zone of unintentional learning, if that makes sense. When we're kids, I think, we're such sponges of information. We have to really, really move quickly and get on track to navigate the world. When you're 4 years old, everything in the world is new to you. And it's important to be focused on everything as much as you can and learn as much as you can. And so then when you get older, you start to be more intentional about what am I learning? How am I learning? What direction do I want to go into? And you get into a situation where you don't think you can actually learn anything anymore. And so I think that, if you are, or if you know people who you feel like are not critical thinkers, are never thinking deeply, I hope this podcast can be the place where you begin to open that up and start to, have discussions in the Discord with other people about some of the things I talk about, and spend some time improving the skill set of thinking, right? I talked about this a little bit in the first episode with the whole reason that this podcast exists, but I want you to be able to improve your skill set of thinking, because it's not necessarily something that comes naturally to everyone. And certain people are in situations where they need to critically think earlier than other people. I actually would say, I would not consider myself at all the captain of the football team stereotype in that sense. I was not popular in high school, right? But one thing that I definitely think I did earlier than others was critically think. My parents were or are people who like to think critically. And I, especially in middle and high school, I had a few teachers. Actually, interestingly enough, my high school English teacher, she was a big part of pushing me to think critically and really understand what I was talking about. And while I was already entrenched in storytelling and I love storytelling by that point, she really honed in what stories were about and critical thinking and how you looked at a story and how you looked at literature and how you looked at all sorts of things, but just with this critical mindset where there are layers to things, and it takes time and it takes thinking and it takes you reasoning through ideas to really get to where you're trying to go. with this idea of like, the malleability of personality and what you learn naturally earlier versus what you learn later, is I was reading all sorts of books when I was very young, or not very young. I would say 9, 10 or 11. That era, I was really reading like crazy. I was reading these 600-page fantasy novels about like teenage dragons and stuff. Just like, hilarious teen books. But I love this stuff, and I love stories. And I would be burning through these books, just like 4 or 5 days burning through a 600-page book. And I was just going through this and going through this and going through this. And I think that what that did for me was it gave me this time where I built a baseline of just like being naturally interested and in love with storytelling. And at the time, I was not breaking down how stories work and what is structure and what is conflict and what is the core elements of a story. I wasn't doing any of that. I was just having fun reading stories. And I think that baseline level of building that love for it helped me do all of the intentional work that I've done later on, where I actually have tried to look at how stories work and how can you identify what's working and what isn't, and what really is the purpose of all of this, and how does that integrate with people and their minds and how we have perceived storytelling over the course of thousands of years. And so that's really what I've been fascinated at recently. And I think for me, I get into this headspace where I don't, because when I think that I haven't learned something naturally, I believe that I can't truly know that thing. And so then I'm hard on myself for making mistakes as I'm learning a new process, right? And I assume that I'm supposed to be naturally good at every single thing I do. And when I'm not naturally good at something, I am very hard on myself. And I'm like, you're an idiot. This should just be obvious. You're behind. That's something that I have a lot, where I'm like, you're behind, you're behind, you're behind. How are you so slow and stupid at this? Look at all these people doing better, right? And I think that you hear a lot of people kind of say, flowery, stupid statements like we're all on our own paths and this kind of stuff. And like, that's true to a certain extent, but really I think the more practical view of it is like, hey, you need to forgive yourself for making mistakes as you are learning something, because you can't learn everything immediately and things take time to learn. And really anything worth doing is going to take time, effort, and mistakes to do. I don't know a single thing in my life that I've found worth doing that didn't take any effort, And that actually, not to derail this whole thing, but that you could take that point right there and go on a whole another avenue with this and say, is that true? Right? This idea that I have that everything that I do that I think is worth doing takes effort and does not come super easily. Is that the correct viewpoint, or am I looking at experience or effort or enjoyment in the wrong way, right? And I think that, I'm not going to go into that now and try to decipher my true thoughts on that right now. But the point is, this allows you to begin these beneficial like rabbit trails for your own mind, where you are able to start thinking about what you believe philosophically. And we're going to get into some books and stuff. I've got books here and all over the floor. And, we're going to get into books about philosophy and sociology and psychology and look at theories. But I'm a firm believer in the fact that you have a brain. And while books and these other things are very beneficial and very helpful and very great to look at somebody else who has organized their thought process. It ultimately comes down to you and your ability to think through ideas and to think through your thought processes and how you view the world and how you view yourself. And books can be fantastic and stories can be fantastic for helping you along this process. But if you're going to then give stories to other people and you are trying to be the author of these stories versus taking them in, you're going to have to do some work on your own outside of influence from storytelling and these sorts of things, where you'll have to answer questions that you have about yourself to yourself only with the help of your own mind, right? And I think that's a very, very valuable process if you are someone who wants to write stories professionally, or just really write stories at all, and have people be impacted by them. So, yeah, that's what I've got today. This is something I've really thought about recently, and I hope that's helpful. And I'm interested. Let me know on the Discord. Start a discussion on the Discord on, do you think personality is malleable, like heavily malleable, where we can really learn the things we want to with intention? Or do you think we're sort of locked in after we learn a few things naturally and we kind of develop what our core personality is? Do you think we're locked in to who that person is? And if you have questions or you have new discussions that you want me to talk about on the podcast, please let me know in the Discord. And I will see you guys next week.